welcome to Journey Through Sci-Fi. My name is James.
My name is Matt.
And we are back for another episode in our Dystopia series. This time we are looking at Fahrenheit 451 and Equilibrium. And what is this week's theme, Matt? What are we looking at this time around?
This week we are looking at characters who have to ask themselves, are we the baddies?
Are we the baddies? Are we in the wrong? What have we been doing that's wrong? Have you done anything that's been wrong this week, Matt?
Obviously not. Of course not, James.
We're good boys. We're good boys on this podcast. So we're going to be looking at Fahrenheit 451 from 1966 and Equilibrium from 2002. Two films which both feature book burning and drugs and a whole lot of dystopian themes.
Yeah, lots of similarities between these two, with the central characters realising that they may be the bad guys in their dystopian future that they are trying to enforce the law in.
Yeah, and we've got to, of course, say a big thank you to our patron Mike, who suggested this pairing for this series over on the Patreon site. So yeah, big thanks to Mike for suggesting these two. I had a lot of fun watching them, and yeah, I'm looking forward to discussing them.
Yep, thank you, Mike. But without further ado, James, should we jump on into Fahrenheit 451?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's slide down our fireman's poles and get into Fahrenheit 451.
Fahrenheit 451. Ray Bradbury, America's leading science fiction novelist, wrote it. Julie Christie, Academy Award-winning actress of Darling and Dr. Zhivago, and Oscar Werner, winner of the New York Critics' Best Actor Award, star in it.
We shall see each other again?
No, we shan't. Why pretend we shall?
Directed by internationally famous French director Francois Truffaut. Fahrenheit 451.
So Fahrenheit 451 is from 1966 and it's directed by Francois Truffaut. Are you a fan of Truffaut's work, James?
I know I've done a lot of studying of Truffaut at uni. A lot of it has gone out of my brain like a sieve, as so much of my uni years have now. But yeah, I do know he was sort of like he's one of the leaders of the French New Wave, isn't he?
Yeah, he's a French New Wave guy. He was also a big film critic as well as a film director. So he wrote a lot about film. And I think there's some books that sort of track his friendship with Alfred Hitchcock. They were mates and they would talk about film a lot, and there are some books written about their conversations. So he's got this he's very in the world of film in the 1960s, I guess we can say.
Yeah,
he wrote in Cahiers du Cinéma a lot, which is a publication, a film publication, and you can actually see a copy of that burning in Fahrenheit 451, which is a little nod to his work there.
I did notice a few sort of little nods in the film, but we'll get into that as we go on. See, I remember Truffaut as being someone that I would put in a lot of footnotes, because I think I quoted him in a lot of essays back in the day. So I feel like, yeah, he's definitely one of those sort of, a respected critic as well as a filmmaker. But of course, this was his only English language film, wasn't it? And he didn't speak English, did he?
No, and I've read that it sounds like he really didn't have a good time making this film because he couldn't speak to anyone, or anyone who couldn't speak French on set. He basically couldn't talk to. It sounds like an incredibly lonely experience for him making this film.
Yeah, I mean, the fact there was the language barrier, and also he had a very sort of turbulent relationship with his lead actor, Oscar Werner, during this. They had lots of falling outs about various things. Oscar didn't want to go near any fire. The whole thing is about burning books. There were lots of scenes he just didn't want to do. And there was lots of back and forth in between the two of them. So that, combined with the fact that he couldn't speak English and his whole crew were English for this English-made film, it was, quite a trying task getting this one made.
Yeah, I laughed then when you said that he didn't like fire, because it sounds a little bit silly because the film is about fire, but at the same time, thinking about it, I don't think it's unreasonable for an actor to want to feel safe on set and not be close to any fire, even though the film contains fire. There should be procedures in place, I guess.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it just made things that much more tricky, I'm guessing, getting the whole thing made. But also, it's Truffaut's only adaptation of a sci-fi as well. And he was not sort of like a big sci-fi guy, but hearing the story, like Ray Bradbury's original story, and hearing about what it was about, I think that's what attracted him to making this into a film. And he was really on board with putting this together after he'd heard about the story, because I think Ray Bradbury's story is just so sort of, it's got a lot of poignant messages in, and I think they're applicable to obviously the time that it was written and also 1966. I mean, the book was published in 1953 by Ray Bradbury, of course, and that was the height of the Cold War. And it feels like a sort of a product of the Cold War, this film and this story, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's cold. There's Cold War stuff there, but also sort of post World War II stuff with the totalitarian government in charge. There's a very unsubtle moment where the captain or someone in the fire team picks up a copy of Mein Kampf, doesn't he? And he says, I think he's making a point that like we burn all books, even this one, you know, as if to say, how could we possibly be considered fascist? We burn Hitler's book. But of course, book burnings in Nazi Germany were a big thing as well, weren't they?
Yeah, and I mean, that was part of the inspiration for this, wasn't it? Because Ray Bradbury had obviously sort of like, he'd been around when all this stuff was happening, and he'd sort of heard the stories about the book burnings. And I think there's quite an interesting interview up on YouTube, which I watched with Ray Bradbury, and he was talking about coming up with the idea for this story. And he was saying basically he was out walking with one of his friends one night, and a police car pulled up, and the policeman got out and said, "What are you doing? Like, what are you guys up to, just walking around?" And Ray obviously got his back up about this because he was just walking around with his mate, and he said, he replied sort of like probably in not the way he should have done, but he said like, "Oh, I'm just putting one foot in front of the other." And the policeman got really wound up by this and started sort of like a bit of back and forthing, and he sort of said like, "Oh, okay, just don't do it again," over just the silliest thing. He's just having a walk with his mate. Ray was so annoyed by this confrontation with this policeman, he went home and he wrote a short story called The Pedestrian. And it was about that kind of thing. It's about a group of people which are considered criminals for walking at night or something like that. And then that sort of branched off into Fahrenheit 451, because he carried on with this character and took him on another walk one day. And then this character ends up meeting Clarice, who is in this film and in this story. And it just spiraled off from there. And this character became a fireman. And then this fireman turns out to be someone who's burning books. And I just loved that was the sort of the first idea that gestated this entire story.
Yeah, it's a very mature response to an annoying kind of interaction with a police officer.
Yeah, I mean, the only comparison I can do is one time I couldn't get into a club because a bouncer could see I was too drunk and was asking me what my star sign was. I, of course, said I was born on the cusp, so I have 2 star signs, and then he wouldn't let me in. I was so angry, I went home and I wrote an entire email, sort of like going through and then sort of like getting articles about being born on the cusp just to prove it. I didn't send this email, luckily, but it's like, it's from a confrontation into something else. And I just love that Ray Bradbury turned it into this.
So you're the great work of art that you created in the wake of that interaction was an angry email quoting how star sign cusps work.
Yeah, not quite the great work that Ray Bradbury put together, but yeah, I think that email was deleted now as well. So
I was just going to say, I'd love to read that email, James.
Is it true that a long time ago, firemen used to put out fires and not burn books?
Oh, really, your uncle is right. You are light in the head. Put fires out. Who told you that?
Oh, I don't know, someone, but is it true? Did they?
Oh, what a strange idea.
So we talked about sort of like when the book came out and it was 1953, but we're looking at the zeitgeist of why this film was made in 1966 as well. So what were the sort of the big things going on around 66?
Well, it's right in the middle of the Vietnam War, isn't it? 1966. Well, not, I don't know if it's the middle, but it's during the Vietnam War. There's also, it's moving into the late 60s where this is prime hippie movement time, isn't it? And certainly towards the end of the film, when we see the book people living on their commune, I thought that was a very like hippie inspired view. I don't know how close that is to what's in the book, but it felt very 1960s hippies.
Yeah, and the one thing I kept thinking about as well was sort of like the way that they treat entertainment, and a lot of this is about sort of like the TV screens that Montag's wife's constantly watching, and the show, and sort of everybody's more glued to their TV sets than anything else than what's going on around them. And the way the media's portrayed as sort of not giving the correct information. And I think that was kind of like, it's all that kind of thing which was happening around the time. People were becoming a bit sort of wise to that kind of thing because it was becoming so prevalent around everything, because you're getting all these news reports about Vietnam, and then sort of like the narrative is changing. So it kind of feels like all of that is feeding back into this. But obviously, like the whole time from the 50s leading up to the 60s and then the 70s, it's a very sort of turbulent time. They've still got the war in their mind from like the World War II, nuclear bombs, there's the Cuban Missile Crisis, all this stuff where everyone is on tenterhooks as to what could happen next. So it feels like all of that is feeding into this dystopian story, and it's just adding extra layer to it and making it more relevant to the audiences. But it's also this film sort of like has a lot about, it's this kind of witch hunt mentality, isn't it? Because they're trying to find people. So we should talk about what the film is predominantly about then. So what's the setting of Fahrenheit 451?
So our main character is called Montag, and he's a fireman, as you said, but firemen are not firemen as we know them now. Everything's fireproof, houses are all fireproof, so there's no need for what we understand a fireman to be. These firemen go around setting fires and burning books, because books are illegal in this dystopian society. And how would you characterise the rest of the dystopia? Like, books are illegal, and everyone's kind of taking drugs that make them happy, but also kind of sedate their thoughts a little bit as well.
Yeah, everyone just seems to be a bit sort of like, they kind of float around a little bit. They don't go too much into the sort of like drug stuff in the film, but there is obviously Montag's wife, who played by Julie Christie, who has this sort of like overdose situation, and she does seem a bit sort of like a bit like an airhead. I think that's probably the only way you can describe her. She's kind of like, she's not there all of the time. And I think she is sort of like a good representation of the rest of the society, because it seems like most people don't seem like they're there. There's another character, there's a neighbor, which Montag talks to during the film. And when he's asking her about sort of like the person who lived next door, she's all quite vague. Like she doesn't quite know what she's talking about or what she's meant to be replying with. And I think this is all sort of feeding back into the use of words and communication, and all of that stuff sort of like is affecting everyone in this population.
I think there's, so Montag's wife is a bit of an airhead, as you said. She is a bit ditzy. I think it becomes, there's one...
Ditzy's a nicer word.
I don't think either are very nice words, but there's a brilliant and quite subtle moment probably about halfway through the film, where she's having a party with some other wives that come round, and they're talking about how unlikely it is that anyone will die that they know. Like, oh, I don't know anyone who died. But then one of them very casually mentions, someone could die in an accident, like Gloria's husband did a couple of days ago. She just very casually mentions that one of those women's husbands literally died recently, and none of them react to it. None of them are really fazed by it. So there's some definite like emotional suppression going on, presumably through the drugs they're taking, or through a kind of semi brainwashing effect of these TV screens that they watch. But it's not really. It's just not really addressed head on. It's just sort of bubbling away in all of these characters.
Yeah, and of course, anyone who is not like these characters is instantly sort of seen as the enemy almost. So it's that everyone's constantly suspicious of everybody else. I mean, if you look at Montag and the rest of his comrades in the fire department, it always seems like they're they're giving each other like odd looks. Like they're very suspicious of each other, and at any moment one of them could turn the other one in for having a book or being a sympathizer. And it feels like that for a lot of the film, doesn't it? This tension.
Yeah, he's got a colleague that's always keeping an eye on him, and whenever he does something that he admittedly shouldn't, we see his colleague like watching from behind a bookcase or from around a corner, and he's always got his eye on him. And that's really like, that's kind of a post McCarthy kind of reference, isn't it? So McCarthy was the guy leading the kind of movement of McCarthyism during the Cold War in America, to basically grass up your neighbours if you think they might be a communist or a socialist. And we'll put them on trial for anti-Americanism, and that's basically what they're doing in Fahrenheit 451, isn't it? You can drop off information in a little post box outside the fire station if you think that one of your neighbours has got a book. But Guy even admits that, like, when they watch someone do that, he even admits, like, well, he might have just, got rid of his noisy neighbour or reported someone higher above him at work so he can get a promotion or something like that.
Yeah, it's this kind of distrust of people, isn't it? And it's one of the things which I saw in this Ray Bradbury interview as well, was him talking about sort of like, again, with the witch hunt aspect. He said that his great-great-great-grandmother or something like that, Mary Bradbury, was actually burned as a witch. So he's sort of like, he's bringing that to the table as well.
Yeah, the witch hunt metaphor is often invoked for that period of McCarthyism in America, because they were just going absolutely mad. And it really affected a lot of people in the film industry as well, didn't it? Like we talked about blacklisted writers before, I think, haven't we? You'd lose your whole career. And because the arts and culture tends to be more left-leaning, in the 50s, that was not a great place to be. Basically, not good to be working in America, really, if you were heavily leaning towards the left politically.
Yeah, definitely not an ideal time to be to have those kind of political beliefs.
See, it's no good, Montag. We've all got to be alike. The only way to be happy is for everyone to be made equal. So, we must burn the books, Montag. All the books.
So what about the intro of this film? So I found it really interesting, the fact there were no credits straight off the bat.
Yeah, not even, I don't think the title comes up on screen, does it?
No, and I was like really confused when it first started.
Yeah.
I was like, why is there this weird voice? Have I got like the audio described version on or something like that? But no, it's all part of the intro, the fact that they haven't got any written words on the screen.
Yeah, it's like setting the scene of a world where there is no written word, which is quite, that's quite a nice. It's quite a nice way to get you into it quite quickly, and it's quite subtle, and it's just because it has that effect on you, doesn't it? Like you said, you feel like this is weird. This isn't how a film normally starts, so you're immediately sort of jerked into thinking more about what you're seeing and hearing, which I think feels like a slightly new wave thing to do, to kind of alienate you a little bit from the standard processes of filmmaking, to make you engage more critically with it. That feels like a new wave technique.
Yeah, it does. There were a few shots which I was looking at throughout the film, and they do feel quite new wave. Sort of, they've got that kind of like aesthetic to them. Like even that intro scene, you're seeing different coloured aerials, aren't you, in the shots? And then there's a shot later on which is kind of like half of the screen is blacked out, so it looks like pages in a book almost.
Pages in a book. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I thought it was. Yeah, it is pages in a book, isn't it? My thought was like because that's the officer is searching someone to see if he's got books in that shot where half the screen sweeps in and blackens. I felt like the sort of the law was closing in on that character kind of thing, and so literally the frame closes in on the two characters. But you're right, the way it swipes across is very much like a page turning as well.
Yeah, and it's all very frantic at the start, isn't it? Because you jump in at the moment these firemen are trying to find and burn books in this guy's house.
Yeah.
And everything's very sort of like, it's quick shots, and then there's like a really quick pan down. It's all quite dramatic.
Yeah, very like, and even when the guy gets a tip off saying you've got to go, like the firemen are on the way, and it cuts in, doesn't it? It's like instead of a zoom in, it's 3 edited cuts closer into him. So again, things closing in on him in a very jerky, violent way as he gets that tip off.
Yeah, I love that at the start, and it's so sort of it's not what I was expecting. I don't know what I was expecting going into this film, but it's Truffaut's already telling you sort of like in the way that he's filming it that it's gonna be dramatic, the stuff that's happening, and he's doing a lot of the storytelling through the shots and the kinetic movement of those shots.
Yeah, I don't know what I was expecting either, but I certainly wasn't. I don't know if this is unfair, but I wasn't expecting it to look this good, and I mean in the sense of just how futuristic and sci-fi it looks, but in quite a subtle way, right? Like there's a lot of shots are just indoors in flats that look totally normal, but some of the aspects of the city look incredible. Chief among them, the monorail. We love a monorail, obviously.
Yeah, definitely.
The mob has spoken, but it just looks amazing. I've never seen anything like it. I had to look it up afterwards because I was thinking like, there's no way they've built a monorail to make a movie in 1966. But it's a real functioning monorail, isn't it? That they just, I don't know how they got to use it. If it's just pure luck and had the right money on the budget to pay to use it, but yeah, it adds so much, doesn't it, that monorail?
Yeah, I mean, apparently it was dismantled shortly after the filming, but whatever permissions they got them at the right time, because the monorail is probably the most futuristic looking thing in the film, because a lot of it is, it's that classic thing of not going too far into the future in your depiction of this world, because they're still sort of like, it's still very much the 60s, isn't it? In terms of the look of the film, it's not trying to be like overly futuristic. It's trying to sort of root it in some sort of reality as well, and like reality of the time.
Well, it's a bit of both, isn't it? Like it does look very 60s and it does look very real, but like, for example, the TV screens, I mean, they look very realistic to our eyes in 2021 because they look like massive flat screen tellies, but that must have looked so futuristic in 1966, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's like when we were talking about Modern Times, like the massive screens in that, this is doing a similar thing. Like it's got the big wall screens, and there's such a feature of these people's like rooms and homes. They're all over the place. And yeah, like you said, they wouldn't have seen anything like that. They were old school TV screens back then. And to have these properly wall-mounted TV screens, they seem like everyday occurrence for us, but in 1966 this is the future, and it just so happens that as the future now.
Yeah, it's like it must be a fairly things that you do with screens when depicting futuristic worlds, it must be quite an easy way to sort of imagine the future, because the trajectory of screens in the real world is so straightforward. They get bigger every year, and and then after some point in history they started to also get flatter, so just bigger and flatter. That's what screens have done, and it's
bigger, flatter, and then mobile.
Yeah,
that was the next thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So when you're kind of designing your futuristic world, just whacking in some big flat screens is a fairly safe bet, really, isn't it? Like if you wanted to set something 50 years from now, just like really big, really flat, really light screens on everyone's walls would be a safe bet.
Yeah, and of course that's become the norm for science fiction, and depicting a futuristic technology is like having screens everywhere, making everything sort of like touch screen and interactive, and just being able to use them like computers. It's all something which is sort of like fed into the sci-fi like motif. It's what you expect in a sci-fi film, don't you? That kind of look. But there were a few dodgy futuristic things in this. What did you think of the jetpacks towards the end?
Yeah, I thought it was a shame, just because everything else had worked so well, and it was like, I don't know, what did it look like? It looked like it looked quite Disney-ish, didn't it? It looked like the sort of thing you'd see in a Disney movie in the 60s or 70s.
Yeah. Yeah, like Bedknobs and Broomsticks or something like that.
Yeah, it was fine. It didn't last for very long. It just looked a bit ludicrous.
Like when they when they first turned up, I wasn't sure if there was something on my TV screen as well, because they're like little sort of like drawn on bits on the cell, aren't they?
Yeah.
And then you get the shot with like the guys on the wires just floating around next to this sort of like projected screen behind them.
I mean, I did actually like the jetpacks themselves. They're like two big tankers. They kind of reminded me of, you know, the things they use in Attack on Titan to like zip around everywhere.
Yeah.
It's the two kind of like, I don't know what you call them, engines, I guess, strapped to the side of you. So it kind of reminded me of that, but in that kind of like jet black mixed with like fighter jet iconography as well to give it that kind of fascistic feel. I thought they were pretty cool design. It's just they look silly on the green screen.
But I mean, other than that, I mean, a lot of this has held up really well. And I mean, the firemen in particular, they're kind of like, they look futuristic-y and dystopian-y as much as possible, but they're still sort of like, they're clearly firemen, but they've been given that kind of like edge to make it more science fiction-y. I've used a lot of E words there.
Yeah, well, one of the things I really liked is, we just mentioned it, that scene that includes the shot where half the screen goes black as someone's being searched. That whole scene is, it's kind of random, narratively speaking. It's just there for a little bit of colour, but it says so much about what the firemen do and how much power they have, like what they're allowed to do. They're literally like going into like a children's play area and just like grabbing a woman's purse and having a look inside and then sending her away, and he pats a woman's tummy to see if she's got any books hidden in there. It's so invasive and like rude, but it adds so much colour to the world of Fahrenheit 451, doesn't it?
Yeah, and there's that baby with the tiny little book in a like pocket,
funny,
and I was like, "Who's reading this tiny book? You must have to have like a magnifying glass in order to read it."
I think it's just a joke. I think that's Truffaut having a little bit of fun with it, because of course, like if you try and think about it too logically about what's going on in the world, it's like, well, he needs to investigate the parents who've given the baby the book, but all he does is like take the little book and like wag his finger like and then that's the end of it. But if it was a more serious, it must just be a joke, because if it was more serious, we'd have to arrest the parents.
Yeah, I mean, they don't show too much of the punishments for people which are found with books, do they? They kind of they mention that they get taken away, and they obviously burn all the books, but you don't see anything sort of like in relation to that. You don't see anybody getting thrown in a cell or really getting picked up too much, do you?
Yeah, and if you think about that, that's a really good point. And if you think about what happens to Montag, towards the end of the film, it does seem like the punishment isn't too severe. If you agree to turn over your books and have them incinerated, like I think Montag would have been all right by the end of the film if he hadn't ran, basically, if he hadn't tried to escape and resisted what they were doing. It seemed like they were giving him a legitimate opportunity to burn his own books and kind of, turn it around, rejoin society,
and come back to their side. But why does he feel the need to start reading and all of this kind of stuff? Because it almost seems to come out of nowhere a little bit, but it's mainly to do with the character of Clarice, who again is played by Julie Christie, and I think that's fascinating as well. The fact that Julie Christie is playing Clarice and Linda, so she's playing both characters, but she's so different in both of those roles. Like I kept thinking, is Julie Christie again?
I don't think I would have known that it was the same actress had I not already read that she was playing two roles. It's a very interesting decision. It doesn't immediately make a lot of sense to me, actually, why that's happening. But I guess it's just sort of showing that, I don't know, how close anyone is to kind of living on the other side of things. Yeah.
I mean, I think the reason that she's doing two roles, again, might have come down to budgeting as well. But I think you can, like, at the same time, Truffaut is a French New Wave director. It's a more interesting way of getting those characters. And obviously they're both connected to Montag in that way that he's got feelings for both of them.
Yeah.
But they're kind of two sides of the same coin, aren't they? Because Linda is a completely different kind of character. She is so wrapped up in being part of the family, this entertainment show that she's constantly watching, and all of that kind of stuff. Whereas Clarice is the reason that Montag starts reading, right? Because she says, have you ever tried reading one of these books which are always burning? Like, you might like it. And then he's like, oh, okay, I'll just sneak a few in and see what happens when I start reading.
Yeah, and to have that kind of seed of doubt planted by someone who looks identical to his wife, even though that is never acknowledged on screen, that obviously has some power over Montag, doesn't it? Truffaut doesn't do anything by accident in his films, and he doesn't do anything sloppily. So it may have helped the budget, but he could have cast any two characters as being the same actors, and he chose it to be Julie Christie playing Clarice and Linda. So yeah, it's a very deliberate decision for sure.
I never knew anyone who got killed in a... Not anyone whose husband died like that. Getting run over, jumping out of a window, yes. Like Gloria's husband a few nights ago. But never that other way. Anyway, that's life, isn't it?
That's what you call it. You're nothing but zombies, all of you. Just like those husbands of yours you don't even know anymore. You're not living, you're just killing time.
Going back to Linda again, and this TV show she's watching, it's kind of like, I was so fascinated by the way that works and how it's... So I read somewhere that it's kind of like the government is capitalizing on people's short attention spans, which again is incredibly relatable to now because no one's got a great attention span.
I've just recently downloaded TikTok for the first time, so I'm fully locked into the short attention span world.
There we go. And it's this kind of like this appetite for that kind of entertainment. People want things quick and fast, like takeaway meals and like TikTok and things like that. But in this, it's these TV shows which are sort of like the thing which is so predominant in it. And the thing which I found fascinating was the sort of the theatre show. When Linda's originally introduced, she says like, oh, I'm going to be in a play. And he's like, what? Why are you going to be in a play? What's happening? And it turns out it's just a TV show that has moments where the audience have a space to react and pretend like they're in the play themselves.
I was so interested in that because it felt like a sci-fi concept, like it was a really interactive show because they're calling her out by name. They're addressing Linda. They're turning to the camera and addressing Linda and inviting her to speak and be part of the conversation. So I was kind of like, my head was racing a little bit with like, oh, how's that done? What's that supposed to be? Is it really like a really clever bit of interactive technology? And then in the same way that the reality is punctured for Linda by Montag, it was for me as well, because they go to bed and Montag's like, well, they probably just like, they rang 200,000 Lindas up and down the country and told them they were going to be in the play. Don't be stupid. And it was so perfectly done because I felt I had the same reaction as Linda in that moment because I was like, oh, right, okay, that's how it's done. And
also I was feeling bad for Linda when it was happening because they have those breaks in the script in the TV show, and then they suddenly turn and go, and what do you think, Linda? And then she just freezes, doesn't she?
Well, it was weirdly stressful, wasn't it? The look on his face when he's looking down the camera is so menacing and threatening, and she is intimidated. Yeah, she's frozen. She can't do it the first time, even though, what is it? I think they're just asking her to like broadly agree with what they're saying. That's the kind of point of the show, isn't it? So it's not exactly like challenging, but she's totally like terrified.
And also they're expecting her to go along with it. So whatever she says, they're going to say whatever's in the script anyway. So they're just going to assume that she's said the line or said what she's supposed to. But she could say anything. It's just this illusion of having free will in those moments and having power over what's going on in the TV screen and being a part of it. But she's got none of that really, has she? She can say whatever she wants or not say anything, and it's not going to affect anything to do with it. Yeah,
and it's sort of conditioning those people who participate in it to be, just go along with things, like you said, like just, basically subtly agree with everything that's happening around them. Don't challenge, don't be difficult, because conversations are going to run in a certain way, and you need to be on board with that because it's the easiest way of, just just getting by, basically, which is very key to pretty much all dystopias. That complicity in the public.
That'll make 16. Then if somebody's ill, well, at least we won't be 13, will we?
But then there's the problem of the rooms, Charles. Lottie has 2 children, Charles, 2 little boys, Freddie and Little John.
I don't see any problem there at all. We can put the 2 children in, well, in Helen's room, for instance. What do you think, Linda?
Look, we're here, they're waiting for you.
I think that...
You see, Linda agrees with me. Lottie's children must go in with Helen.
Linda's so obsessed with being like the popular one amongst her friends and sort of like being one of the group and being part of this, being part of the family and being considered one of the cousins as they refer to everyone who's watching the TV. And she's always taking those drugs as well, isn't she? And the overdose scene I found quite harrowing because everyone's quite nonchalant about it. Like Montag is genuinely like worried for his wife, but these paramedics come in. He says like, is there a doctor? They go, nah, we do this all the time. We're just going to give her a quick transplant. She'll be fine. But she looks dead.
Yeah.
Doesn't she?
Yeah. She gets a full transfusion of blood. She gets an entire like replacement of all of the blood in her body and then just wakes up cheery as anything and has no memory of what happened the night before, except she's really hungry
and frisky apparently.
Yeah. It was creepy, wasn't it, that the way these medics will just show up at your home and just replace your blood. It's like the kind of the invasion of your health in this kind of a dystopian world. Like, it's menacing.
Yeah, it was just like another extra sort of layer in there, which just made it that much more disturbing, the stuff that was going on in this sort of like society.
But Guy sees it for what it is, as he does with many things throughout the film. He's seeing it with the audience's eyes, isn't he? He's, like you say, he's terrified. He thinks Linda's dying, and he's right to be terrified. And similarly, in that party scene where he causes a fuss, he's just witnessed a woman set herself on fire and burn to death. He's got every right to be upset about that and want to like talk about that and talk about how messed up it is. And they just like, oh, don't talk about that. That's not very nice. I don't want to hear it. He's going crazy that like people don't feel the same way he does about realizing how weird everything is.
Yeah, that scene with the book collector is another one of those moments, isn't it, where you're just kind of like, wow, this place is really mad. Like the fact that she is willing to burn with the books and she doesn't try and make an effort to get away or anything really. She's just sort of like, she's there on the staircase and she's confronting the firemen and just, she knows that she's been found out. She knows they're going to come and destroy this library. And even the way that the chief is reacting to that as well. Like he's saying stuff like, this is like perverse, this idea of like reading and emotions, and why do people need these stories what does it offer anyone? You shouldn't like dream of stuff. You should just be sort of like in your reality. And all of this stuff like was really quite powerful.
Yeah, like it's unfair that these fictional stories should exist because it gives people unrealistic like hopes and dreams of what they could achieve. Or he claims that like philosophers are narcissists because they want their particular philosophy to be believed above all others and everyone else is wrong apart from them. It was an interesting take from the captain. Whereas, it's interesting to see these dystopias where like the people in authority have much stronger opinions about things than the other characters. We'll see it again in Equilibrium when we get to that. But like the chief is quite passionate about burning the books and why they ban the books. And Montag's just like, well, I just do it. It's a job. It's just what I do. Books are bad because I got told books are bad, so I burn them.
And yeah, because the chief is also sort of like, he says, you're at that stage where you're questioning things. This always happens. He says so many firemen go through this phase and they come out and then they come back and they get a promotion and then they're more into their job afterwards. But that's not the case for Montag, is it? Because he's getting all these thoughts and he's getting the emotions that are connected to them. Because when he's reading, he's sort of like enjoying the sort of art of it as well. opening himself up to this different world from what he's been experiencing previously. He just sort of like went about his job and was constantly finding books and then burning them, and there was nothing more to his life than his job and getting a promotion, and that's kind of like the be all and end all of him.
Yeah, he's also really interested in like feeling a human connection with the writer of the book, isn't he? He says behind every one of these is a man. Interesting that he assumes that every writer is a man, but he says behind one of these is a man, a real person. So he's obviously like feeling that connection. It's interesting. I don't know how close that is to the book, but it's interesting if Ray Bradbury was putting that sort of a theme into it, making you think about the person who wrote the book is quite a big thing for a writer to do. Like, they're making a point with that, aren't they?
And when he's reading the book, when he's reading one of the books to Linda's friends, the strong emotion that one of Linda's friends has, and she is just like, she's disgusted by it, isn't she? She's like, "Oh, you've made me cry. I didn't want to feel like this. I didn't want to have these emotions. I want them buried deep. I don't want to sort of like have this because it's too much." I think she keeps saying it's too much for her to handle.
Yeah, or they're just like, you can read a beautiful scene in a book and it might make you cry because it's so emotional, but they consider that cruel to be made to cry, because it's quite a simplistic sort of view of emotion, isn't it? Like, this feels bad, therefore I don't want it to happen. You're not like processing the emotion if you read something so moving and sad that it makes you cry. There's a lot that you can get from that in terms of your own sort of personal growth, but these people don't want to engage with that. And again, it's that sort of short attention span thing where they don't want to engage with anything on that level.
And it's kind of, I suppose it's their way of keeping themselves safe from it, because they see it as such a danger, don't they? Whereas Montag is embracing it, and he's seeing the sort of like the free will aspects of having these emotions, and he gets so addicted to it. There's points where he's just says like, I must read, I must find out more. And he's got that thirst for knowledge about the past, and he just wants more information because he's not getting this information from anybody else, because no one else is interested in the past. They're so wrapped up in the now. No one's thinking about what came before or what might come after. It's just very sort of like, this is how we do things. We don't change, and this is why things run like this, because this is the best way.
Yeah, and it's not just that kind of historical knowledge that he's seeking out, or the emotional knowledge. He's literally just reading like encyclopedia entries about a rhinoceros at one point, isn't he? It's all kinds of expanding his brain that he's seeking from that. The only thing that I didn't really understand, the first time he picks up David Copperfield, and he very slowly reads it, and he has to like follow each word with his finger, because he's not a strong reader. That it makes sense that he wouldn't be a strong reader. But how does he know how does anyone know how to read at all? If apart from the people that are kind of in rebellion against it and want to rescue the books, obviously they would. I understand how they may have come to learn to read. They're kind of living in this underground sort of way. But how does Montag know how to read?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that comes into sort of like the way that they're schooled as well, because Clarissa's a teacher, isn't she?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, what was she teaching before? Was she... Because I think you can hear them doing lots of like sums in the class when they go and visit the school. But I don't know. Sort of like, would they have those written down? Or, I mean, numbers are different to sort of like written words, but then how are you posing the question every time?
Yes, yeah, exactly. Numbers exist in the written form, don't they? Because everyone has a number. Everyone's kind of assigned a number, and that's how you like trace people. But we don't see anything written down. That's like the whole point, isn't it? So yeah, I don't really know. I mean, I guess they must be, but they're reciting the times tables, aren't they? They're just like saying it out loud. That is a way that you can at least learn your times tables without the need to actually write those numbers down.
Yeah, that's a good point. And like, it's all about sort of things being relayed to you verbally in this, although they've still got like the files on people. And then when you see the files, it's like images. I can't remember. There's nothing written on those, is there? They're done with different shaped stamps and things like that.
Maybe their number. I'm not sure. But you're right. They use like this code of like stamps and stuff. Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, because all the different ways they've gotten around having to write anything down is quite mind-boggling, isn't it?
And Montag, like, he's a little bit predisposed to enjoying reading before he gets David Copperfield and starts reading that, because he's reading a comic book, isn't he, or a comic in bed, but it has no words, it's just the pictures. But he's, there's something there, the action of sitting in bed and enjoying this story. He's already doing that, even though his wife sits there with a little portable television and plugs herself in and watches the family shows. But he would rather read his comic, even though it has no words. He's got this predisposition to it before the kind of events kick off.
Yeah, and I think that's so important, isn't it? Because he's kind of like he wants to be like finding out about stories and things like that, and putting himself in those kind of like positions, maybe like being the different characters and sort of seeing all of that stuff. And I mean, just seeing how much his enthusiasm for literature sort of like spills out into the house is amazing to watch as well. Like that scene where they're finally taking out all the books. He's just got so many dotted around all these places. He's got like a couple in the toaster. Yeah. He's got them like hidden in a vent. They're all over the place. And that's what I found like another really interesting aspect of the film is just like how everything can be used to hide other stuff. Like you see it right at the start, and then seeing sort of how Montag sort of his house has changed and his character has changed by the end of it, to the point that he has become one of the people he's been chasing all this time. And yeah, I think that fits in really well.
Yeah, and his response to that is, like we were saying earlier, he's given this opportunity to burn his own books and kind of rejoin society, but he torches his bed, his marital bed. Like he sets that alight before anything else. I thought that was a nice little like, hey, fuck you, this society. I don't want to rejoin. And then of course he sets his boss on fire. Do I dare live out the American dream?
But like he's setting all these fires in his house, but it's a fireproof house, isn't it?
Yes.
So
fair point, yeah.
That's why they're kind of. So like his bed's not fireproof, but the house supposedly is.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And yet his sort of like his boss isn't fireproof either, even though he's got this like. That you would have thought his suit be fireproof, but then I suppose he takes his gloves off and stuff.
Well, I don't. No, those are just uniforms, aren't they? Because remember, in the opening scene, the fireman who is entrusted with the flamethrower puts on like an asbestos suit, doesn't he? The white kind of cloak, and it's got a hat. So yeah, they do have fireproof gear, but they only put that on when they're about to use the flamethrower and actually do the burning. It's like, they're called firemen and their job is to start fires, but like there's a point where the captain says, oh, this was early on in my career before I was even qualified to use the flamethrower. Like so much of their job doesn't include fire. It's the stop and search, it's the informing and all of that. That's actually what a fireman does. And setting the fires is quite small. That's a small proportion of the job that they do. They're a law enforcement agency primarily.
Yeah, and I think this whole idea of them being a law enforcement agency is like another interesting aspect of it, because Ray Bradbury knew a lot of firemen because his family were sort of like firefighters and things like that. And he had this, he said like in one of the interviews, he used to go and pet their Dalmatian or something like that. Like, of course, it's a firehouse with a Dalmatian, the classic.
Why do firefighters use Dalmatians?
I don't know. It's one of those things. Listeners, if you know why firefighters are often seen with Dalmatians or dogs, just let us know, because it's something I don't know.
They must be, it must be what they're bred for. They must be, maybe you can't set them alight or something. I don't know.
They're really good at sniffing out fire.
Yeah.
Yeah. They've got the best noses for fires. It might be that.
Or they might be good at, they might just be very like brave. Like they can go into a burning building and, rescue people maybe. That'd be cute.
Novels aren't life. What did Montag hope to get out of all this print? Happiness? What a poor idiot you must have been. This gibberish is enough to drive a man mad. Thought you could learn from these how to walk on the waters. Did you? Montag must learn to think a little. Consider how all these writings, all these recipes for happiness, disagree. Now let this heap of contradictions burn itself out. You know, it's we who at this moment are working for man's happiness. Look, isn't that lovely? The pages, like flower petals or butterflies. Luminous and black. Who can explain the fascination of fire? What draws us to it, whether we're young or old?
Yeah, so knowing all of these firefighters, Ray Bradbury was like, okay, so what happens when everything's fireproof? What do firefighters do? So again, that sort of led him to go down this thought path of, okay, so if they're not putting out fires, maybe they're starting fires, and then why would they be starting fires? And it sort of like led him down this story.
They're a perversion of firefighters, aren't they? Because they do not fight fires, they start fires. It's literally the opposite of what a real firefighter does. And it's interesting that this dystopian society would take the iconography of firemen, who are, you know, heroic people in society, really like respected, brave, important people in society, and then, pervert that and use it as the kind of instrument of their law enforcement. So they've still got a fire engine, but it's, you know, and it's red and it's got a bell. That opening scene, they look like firemen. You know that they're firemen straight away. They've got fire poles, which they can go up instead of down. I love that.
They can go up.
But yeah, they've got all this iconography of it, but they're doing the literal opposite of what a firefighter should do. It's just a great perversion and inversion of the firefighter's real life role.
Yeah, he turns them into crazy fire starters, twisted fire starters.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm a fire starter, twisted fire starter.
So we should talk about the sort of the finale of the film as well. So the idea of the book people, I think that's it seems like the perfect way for them to keep this literature and these books alive, doesn't it? Because the idea is that you've got a commune of people, which we mentioned previously, and they're kind of like the outcasts of society who still love like books and want to keep the written word alive. But the only way they can do that is to memorize these books. And I found that like a crazy thing. Like, how are they memorizing these books word for word? I suppose it's possible, but some of these books must be massive.
Yeah, I can't memorize a book word for word. It's absolutely mad. But it is a nice concept, though, isn't it? I like this. What I really liked is the way they take on the name of the book. So that's kind of like referred to before we see them, that they become the book, but you don't really think too much of it. But then when you're introduced to them, they're literally like introducing themselves as, I'm Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, Volume 1. You know, it becomes their name and their identity. But again, like that's quite interesting, because we talked last time about dehumanization in a dystopia, and we do see that in this film. Montag is referred to in the third person all the time. Like the captain says, "Oh, Montag doesn't speak very much, does he?" To Montag, instead of saying you, he says Montag, and I think Montag does it himself as well. So he's dehumanized in that way, but then he doesn't break free from that in the end. He just goes to a different kind of dehumanization. Do you think I'm putting too much focus on it because we talked about it, or, you know, it just feels weird that he just goes into another society where they aren't human, they're books?
Yeah, I think it is important though to look at it, because they're making them their whole selves just this one thing. And they're dedicating their whole lives to being a book and then reciting this story to other people. But then I suppose you don't get a sense of what else they're doing, because it seems so focused on the fact that they are just memorizing these books, and they're just, at the very last scene, they're going around in the snow and they're just talking to each other. They're just telling these stories.
Well, then they're not, I don't even think they're really talking to each other. They're just reciting. I didn't really think it looked like anyone was listening to each other, especially the way it's done in montage. They're all talking over each other because of how it's edited. So who's really listening to these books at the end of the film? They're just speaking into the void.
And also, if you start listening to someone else's story, listen to another book, then are you going to forget your book? And yeah, you need to remember your book for the rest of your life because you're that book.
Yeah.
I mean, and the fact they had Ray Bradbury's Martian Chronicles in there, I quite like that. I was like, oh, yep, nice little nod there.
I'm sure he enjoyed that. It's a weird one. I wasn't too sure about the ending. I wasn't too sure how happy of an ending it felt like. It just felt strange to me.
Yeah, it was sort of like it was the very bit at the end, wasn't it? Just like where do you go if you're living in a dystopian society to be free? And then for Montag, the only place he can go is the middle of the woods with these people living in this like abandoned like train carriage. That's the only place for him. You have to be out of society in order to sort of like be free. And I think we're going to see that again and again, aren't we?
We are. I think that's going to come up a lot this series. And not least of all, it's going to come up and we're going to see it in Equilibrium as well. So with that, shall we move on?
Yeah, let's talk about Equilibrium then, shall we? And some gun fu. So, roundabout here, Matt, if we were doing adverts, it'd be an advert, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what would we advertise? I suppose we'd advertise our Patreon, wouldn't we?
Yeah, I think we'd want to direct people to patreon.com/journeythroughsci-fi, right?
Yeah, definitely. We've got loads of episodes on there, but I think with this point in the podcast, we need to sort of like start coming up with jingles.
Okay.
And something like that. So what would you do if we were doing a jingle now? Like, how would you do a Journey Through Sci-Fi Patreon jingle?
Well, I think, James, it'd sound a little bit like this. Now, that'd be really good if I prepared anything, but I've actually got nothing to follow that up on. James, you're the musical one out of the two of us. What would you make it sound like?
Well, I haven't quite got it down yet, but this was a little thing which came to mind the other day, and I was like, and it goes, if you want more episodes, come along to the Journey Through Sci-Fi Patreon.
James, that was very, very moving. Thank you for singing that to me.
I think maybe we could do it in different genres as well if we keep doing this little advert bit. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. We'll see if we can do it. But yeah, if you're listening and you want more content, then head on over to Journey Through Sci-Fi, the Patreon page, and then for a small fee per month, you can get a couple of extra bonus episodes every month, and yeah, lots of other content we put up on there. So yeah, why not come and join in on the fun?
We'll see you over on Patreon. I can't believe you tried to make me sing.
You can't do this. You cannot do this.
There's nothing we can't do.
It's real. Burn it.
Cleric, I can only hope one day to be as uncompromising as you. You're a family man.
Yes, sir, a boy and a girl.
Don't move! Don't move! This is a lawful entry. We have a warrant for your wife's arrest.
Remember me.
So we're going from the 60s into 2002 with Equilibrium, the very sort of matrixified version of a dystopia in this. What did you think of this film first off, Matt? And like, what do you remember it? Do you remember watching it when you were younger?
Yeah, I don't think I saw it when it came out. I think I saw it a few years later, but I remember thinking that looks really cool. It was very, like you said, post-Matrix. I think, did it also come out about the same time as The One starring Jet Li?
Yeah, I think there was kind of like an influx of sort of Matrix style films around about that time where it's kind of like the kung fu stuff came through, and yeah, they were making a big thing about this sort of like futuristic depiction of like a world where they're doing kung fu all the time and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, The Matrix put kung fu in a sci-fi film, and then that was what you had to do basically following The Matrix. Or, not necessarily, but there was a wave of kung fu sci-fi movies, and this was right there at the forefront of them. Christian Bale, you got Sean Bean in there briefly. Sean Pertwee, Taye Diggs. Remember Taye Diggs? I feel like he's not really in movies anymore.
Yeah, Taye Diggs. He was the heartthrob, wasn't he? He's always sort of like, in whatever thing he's in, he'll take his shirt off and girls will go crazy. And guys will go crazy as well. Everyone goes crazy for Taye Diggs.
Yeah, there is like almost sexual tension between Taye Diggs and Christian Bale in this film, isn't there? You know, when they're having their little sparring session with the wooden swords, it reminded me of the Flight of the Osiris, the Animatrix film that we watched for Patreon.
Yeah.
You know, when they're having like the sexy sword fight in that, which is really weird. I was reminded of that, the kind of the tension between them. They know something about each other, or do they, don't they? You know, just, it was almost sexual, the chemistry. It's very strange.
And I mean, yeah, Christian Bale's like tapping Taye Diggs' balls with his kendo stick, isn't he? So, I mean, it's definitely there.
Yeah, exactly.
So tell me, do they know?
There are theories. I have one or two of my own, but at the moment, they're premature.
So let's talk about this film then, and sort of like the setting first off. So it's set in a futuristic society. It's definitely on trend for this series. It's set in 2072, and there's a drug which is inhibiting people's emotions, and all war has been stopped. But there's loads of enforcers going around who are called the Grammaton Clerics, who use extreme violence to sort of like get people to do what they want to an extent.
To punish people who are not behaving as the dystopian society dictates. So the Prosium drug inhibits your emotions, and some very clunky narration and text on screen at the very beginning of the film explains that emotions have been identified as the cause of all of humanity's suffering, the reason we go to war. There's been a Third World War that's incredibly destructive before the events of the film, and all of that is pinned on fairly reasonably the concept of man's inhumanity to man, and man's inhumanity to man is attributed to emotion and, you know, the feelings of primarily hatred, I guess, driving all that violence, and that's identified as the key problem in society. So we'll suppress our emotions and then live in peace. I was going to say blissful peace, but of course the peace is not blissful because they can't experience bliss.
Yeah, of course. They're just sort of like, they're drones, aren't they, basically?
Yeah.
And it's this kind of like, again, we've talked about utopias which are actually dystopias. And this is kind of like fitting that bill, isn't it? Because they're very much pitching you a society that has no war, where people are living in peace, but that peace also comes with no emotions and you can't feel anything at all. So it's kind of like it's the dehumanization factor coming in again, but they're trying to do it for a good reason, would you say?
Yes. Broadly speaking, yes. We're going to see the cracks in how good that is throughout the rest of the film. But the idea is we cannot afford to have another war. It was too devastating, the last World War. So we will willingly sacrifice our positive emotions to get rid of the dangerous negative emotions. And that's kind of the world that they live in. And Father is proclaiming it as a great success in another very clunky bit of exposition just shortly after the beginning of the film. There's a lot of heavy exposition where people explain the society of the film in narration. At least Father's giving it as like a lecture that works in universe, which is a lot better than the just like text on screen explaining stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Kurt Wimmer is trying to get all of that exposition in as quickly as possible, so you sort of like, you know what's going on in this world, but it is a bit clunky.
It's clunky. You say he's trying to do that. To me, it I don't know, it felt very tacked on. It felt like something you had after the first test screenings, where audience was just like, we had no idea what was going on at the start of the film. Even with Sean Pertwee's speech, I really didn't understand. So they just had to like tack on this little bit of explanatory description at the start.
Yeah, just to sort of like to get, because at the root of it, there's quite an interesting story in Equilibrium, but it feels like a story that we already know as well, doesn't it? Because to me, it's a combo of 1984 and Fahrenheit 451.
And The Matrix.
So it's like you mash those films together and you've got this. But I still think it's like I still really enjoyed it. Like for all of that and for knowing the story and kind of where it's going to go, it's entertaining. This film is thoroughly entertaining, and you can just sort of like go along for the ride. But also, I think as a dystopian film, it's a story which you're going to see again and again, and that story isn't going to get old because it's something which is always going to be relatable and sometimes needs to be in the public mindset as well, so that we don't end up in a dystopia.
Yeah, or it's relevant to just update that kind of story from time to time for a new audience and refresh those themes.
Yeah, and I think it definitely does refresh the themes, doesn't it? And I mean, you've got characters which are sort of like very similar to those other films. Like Father is basically Big Brother in 1984, and then Preston is basically Montag, isn't he? He's going through the same sort of awakening in the film. So you've got all of these comparisons in there and the sort of like the Matrix stylizing. But how does the actual city look as well? What's the sort of like, how do they make it look dystopian?
It's incredibly ugly, isn't it? In a good way. Like it's so, everything is monochrome in the city of Libria. Everything, like all of the production design is just like, it looks like steel. It's the colour of steel, but not shiny steel, sort of dull steel. They all wear black, grey, dark brown sometimes, but not very often. And for special purposes, you get a clean white suit. But that's about it. It's all very, just monochrome, isn't it? But then you get these like flashes of colour within that, like for the kind of key objects that are sending Preston on his emotional journey, as it were. It really reminded me of Playtime in that sense, where the splashes of colour come into this monochrome world.
Yeah, and you forget that's how important colour is as well to sort of emotions as well, and because different colours are supposed to give you different emotions, aren't they? And they're all connected. Like you see red and it's supposed to be anger or passion, and blue's like a colder color because of all the things that it's, all the different connotations, and all the connotations that these colors have are taken out when you take them away from the society. So the fact that they are all sort of in greys, blacks and whites, there's an absence of color and there's like an absence of emotion, and all of that's reflected in the sort of the stylizing.
Yeah, I think that there is like some inherent there is something inherent about that with the colours and the effect it has on you. Like, it's not just association. I think that I can't quote them now, but I think there are sort of scientific principles at work that are inherent to how you react to certain colours. So that like how some animals will have red markings, and that's an evolutionary trait that demonstrates to predators that they might be poisonous to eat, or it could just be a trick to make predators think they're poisonous to eat when they're not actually poisonous. But red has that warning feeling in nature. Presumably because it's the same colour as blood, I'm not sure. But some of these things are inherent, aren't they?
Yeah, and I mean, it's all sort of like, it feeds back into being aware of your surroundings. And a lot of this film is about the characters not really being aware of their surroundings or what they're doing. So the fact that there's no colour, there's nothing to distract them from their purpose, which is doing whatever like job that they've been assigned to. Again, it's the government control of these people. And that's like, I think that's something you don't really think about when you think about sort of like dystopian societies. You don't think about how much the impact of or absence of colour will have on people.
I think that observation about your awareness of what's going on around you in a dystopia, that's a really interesting observation in the context of this film, because the clerics who learn Gun Carter, that is all about hyper-observation of your surroundings, isn't it? It's all about calculating all the possible angles that you could be shot from or shoot to in order to like maximize your accuracy and efficiency killing people. But that does make them stand out as hyper aware people in the city of Libria, unlike the general population who, as you say, just sort of plod through life, not experiencing emotion, going to their jobs and getting on with things and not being aware of the situation. But it kind of primes Preston to be the character that he is in this film, because he is one of these people with this hyper awareness through his training.
Yeah, it's his perception of the world, isn't it? Because he's looking out for all of these different things, that is making him more susceptible to being awoken. He has this awakening, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's at risk of well, I say at risk, but he's more prone to picking up on an emotional trigger because that's his job, you know. It is his job to look for emotional triggers, because then he can find sense offenders, but he's at risk of then experiencing those emotions himself, which is exactly what happens.
Yeah, and it feels like they do sort of like, they tell you that he's got emotions like quite early on. You see some of his reactions to things in flashbacks, so it's something which he's always had, but obviously all the drugs that they're on, the prosium, is sort of inhibiting that. But then for whatever reason, Preston is still kind of like aware, because in the moment where you see his wife being taken for sense offences, she gets carted off by the powers that be, and he sort of like gives them a look, doesn't he? Like he sees what's happening, and he's got like there's moments of recognition that he knows what's going on.
Yeah, it's classic Christian Bale playing a character who is not properly in touch with his emotions. All of his most memorable performances are doing that, which is very interesting when you look at his career. But yeah, it shows on his face, because she kisses him, doesn't she? She gives him a big, passionate kiss and says something, I can't remember, she'd say, "Don't forget me," or something like that. And yeah, you can see it on his face that he's experiencing emotions in that moment, as you would expect, but he obviously denies it later. Also, there was quite early in the film, there was a bit of a weird bit of dialogue that I picked up on, where it sounds like he's being kind of disciplined by DuPont about an almost unforgivable lapse. But I wasn't clear when that lapse was. They're talking about a lapse of taking prosium, I assume. But I wasn't clear when that happened. Like, he was referencing his wife being taken away, but something had happened early on in the film where he'd broken the rules and he was getting a little bit of a telling off, but he was kind of allowed to continue.
Yeah, maybe it's because the fact he doesn't pick up on the fact that his wife's a sense offender. Like, that could have been the lapse in judgment.
Of
like
course,
the fact. Yeah, I think that sort of like is the moment that, and because of that is why he ends up in the position that he's in later on. But what is the moment in the film where sort of Preston goes down this route? What's sort of like the catalyst?
It all kind of starts to unravel for Preston after his partner Partridge does exactly what Preston goes on to do later in the film. He takes a little bit of it's poems by Yeats, isn't it? He takes one of the books from the scene of the crime, as it were, that they've burnt, and he takes it for his own use, saying that he's going to turn it in later. But that leads Preston to have to track him down, follow him, find out he has also been committing sense offences, and executes him on the spot. Classic Sean Bean death. I was actually really surprised, because it's been a long time since I've seen it, and I did not expect Sean Bean to die in the first 10 minutes of the film.
Yeah, really quick. I mean, we should take a time out to talk about Sean Bean's infamous death streak. Like, it's loads of films, isn't it? And I've always had it in my head that it's loads of them. But I did look it up on the internet to try and find out sort of how many times he's actually been killed in a film. How many do you reckon it is?
250.
Oh, that's a big number. You've overshot a little bit there, Matt. So according to my research, like, obviously I haven't watched every film and show that Sean Bean's in to make sure that's accurate, but I think it's about 25 times he's died on screen, and that's in a career of 36 years. So I mean, even so, that's quite a lot. But do you want to know who has died the most in on-screen performances?
Yeah.
So Danny Trejo.
Oh, wow.
He's been killed 65 times on screen.
That makes sense. I mean, Danny Trejo is like ridiculously prolific, isn't he? He's been in a lot of films, and Danny Trejo tends to star in very violent movies as well, doesn't he? So that's more understandable, I think. But like, it's weirder for Sean Bean, because Sean Bean, I don't associate him really with starring in violent films. He's not an action star. He also doesn't tend to play bad guys, whereas Danny Trejo almost exclusively plays bad guys. although that's changing now. But, there's no reason why Sean Bean would be the type of actor who is often playing characters who die. I think that's why it stands out so much with Sean Bean. And also it's like you're quite often disappointed. You're sad to see him go when he's killed off. You're like, no, because he's Sean Bean, he's great. So when he does die, you're like, oh, that sucks.
Oh, not again, Sean, please. Yeah, so when he survives in, like, spoiler for Possessor. He survives in Possessor.
Who was he in that?
But
I forgot he was in that.
He's the guy who gets beaten to a pulp.
Okay.
He's the dad, isn't he? He's the evil
forgot,
dad.
yeah.
But yeah, he actually survives, but you don't really see him afterwards. But so he sees his partner. He sees his partner with a book, shoots him in the head.
The next day, he breaks his prosium vial by mistake. So it's this combination of like accidents and deliberate actions on his part. So that's an accident. He doesn't mean to break it, so he can't take his dose that morning. But then he does choose not to get another dose. He can go to the Equilibrium Center and get another dose. And again, just by circumstance, it's not open that day. But when his partner picks him up, he chooses to lie and says, "Yep, got my dose, all good. Let's crack on."
I assume you dream, Preston.
I'll do what I can to see they go easy on you.
We both know they never go easy.
Then I'm sorry.
No, you're not. You don't even know the meaning. It's just a vestigial word for a feeling you've never felt.
Yeah, so there's something in him that is kind of like intrigued to find out what will happen if he doesn't keep taking the prosium. So this leads him down this route of awakening, and he becomes infatuated with this woman called Mary O'Brien, who's played by Emily Watson. And she is like quite a strange character for me. Like, it felt like she was a bit sort of shoehorned in there as a love interest. And you find out that she had a relationship with Sean Bean's character, and that sort of like seemed like a bit of a disconnect for me, because Preston has this really, like, he's infatuated with Mary as the film goes on. Yet
I wasn't totally convinced that he was. I don't know. Yeah, you're right that.
Or is he intrigued? It's kind of like it's not quite.
I think he's racked with guilt, and she is effectively now the widow of Partridge, his partner, who he killed, and now he's experiencing all the emotions, including guilt for what he did to Partridge. But yeah, there's that kind of like when she tries to stab him, and then they have like again weird sexual energy between them. I'd say that like it's fitting for this film, which is about a society with no emotion, but all sexual tension and energy in this film is weird. It's a film that doesn't handle sexuality very well at all, which thankfully works because it's a society that doesn't handle sexuality at all. So it kind of makes sense for that. But again, it's like, there's this weird sexual tension between them. That's the only time I really thought of her as any kind of potential love interest. I thought it was mostly the guilt.
I think it's the ribbon though as well, and they make a big thing about like he's always sniffing it when no one's around.
Yeah,
and it's kind of like that's a little bit creepy. But again, he doesn't know what to do with any of his emotions, does he?
Yeah.
He doesn't know how to handle it. Like he's been trained into this way of thinking, and this. So when he's suddenly flooded with emotions, he experiences everything like heightened. So there's the moment when he sees like a bit of light out the window, and there's a rainbow once he gets the stuff off the window, and his mind is blown by it, and he just can't handle it. He's like overcome with these emotions, and it's kind of like how does he deal with that? And then obviously all these other things are happening to him at the same time. It's like it's overdrive.
That's more what I took from the sniffing the ribbon. It's like, I haven't sniffing the ribbon. It sounds so filthy, doesn't it? But that's more what I took from it. It's just like he's overwhelmed by the very experience of it, rather than sort of a romantic feeling. But yeah, I agree. There's definitely something there. It does make me wonder, like, how does marriage actually function in Libria? He's married to his wife. He's got kids with her, but they don't experience love. So I can imagine a world where that's the setup. No one's got any emotion, so you would be paired up with a woman based on your sort of, I guess maybe you work well together as like an efficient family unit. Like you'll be a dad for this reason, and she'll be a good mum for this reason. So you can most efficiently raise children together. So you get paired up. But then why would he feel sad about her being a sense offender when he can access his feelings again? Because he was never in love with her. Because he didn't experience love at the time.
Yeah, but then it's kind of like a part of him felt something for her, didn't it? Because like all the looks that he gives her, and like he's obviously like he's sad that she's dead and he feels that connection to her. But yeah, I know what you mean. It's like, how are they partnering up these people in this society? Could it be like to do a station, or like you said, like efficiency? Everything seems to be working on that sort of level, doesn't it? I mean, even down to like the gun Carter stuff itself, like that is about efficiency. And again, sort of like everything is supposed to be as efficient as possible. And then if it's not, then it's just not kept around.
And emotions run counter to that efficiency, and emotions muddy the waters of efficiency and spoil it, basically.
So I've got to ask you then, Matt, like, what did you think of the gun Carter stuff in general? Was it silly or was it great?
It's quite silly, isn't it? To be honest, there's some good kung fu fights in this film that I actually really enjoyed, but they're all when they're not using guns, or when they're not using guns to shoot. And when they start doing the actual gun Carter, the shooting, I just thought it looked insane. It looks so weird.
It's mad.
Especially
it's like a weird choreographed dance, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like,
that there's most notably the very first scene where we see Gun Carter, where he goes into the darkened room. It's like quite an iconic scene. It's the bit that everyone remembers from Equilibrium. He's standing still and he's just sort of flicking his arms around his body in right angles to get the perfect line and shoot all these people. When they explain what Gun Carter is, that it's all, like you said, it's efficiency, working out all the angles and the best way to shoot and the best way to avoid being shot. That doesn't make any sense to then walk into a room and stand still when like 12 guys are shooting at you. That is clearly not the most efficient way to avoid being shot. That's the absolute opposite of what you should do, right? I assume. Aren't you an incredibly easy target to hit if you stand perfectly still and flail your arms around?
I love it when you analyse these things to this detail. It's great. It's so
But it doesn't
good.
make sense,
I was just
does
like,
it?
I mean, it doesn't make sense. It's like karate chopping with your gun, but it looks quite cool. I thought it looked all right. It's like, it's mental. It's absolutely mental. But it's also like, I've been watching a lot of Kung Fu films recently as well, like old school ones like Shaolin Temple and the 36 Chambers and all this kind of stuff.
Wu-Tang films.
Like, yeah, Wu-Tang films, basically, because I'm obsessed with Wu-Tang. But it's harking back to that and that sort of action film kind of thing, but they're trying to update it with guns, and I don't know if it's necessary, and especially like in a dystopian world where they're trying to get rid of war, surely it would have made more sense if it's all like hand combat.
Yeah. Well, you're right, but obviously we know that.
But then if the rebels have a bunch of
it's
machine guns,
it's a hypocritical society, isn't it? Yeah. Yes, you're absolutely right. If they were true to their word of abolishing war, but they are also ruling with an iron fist, which includes making use of guns. Yeah. But yeah, I think they could have done stuff with that, because definitely like the best kung fu scenes in the film are the ones where they're not using guns. There is good kung fu here. When Christian Bale like snaps the guy's arm, it's great. It's like a proper little bit of great cinema violence. I couldn't get along with the actual Gun Carter.
I read somewhere, I think it was on IMDb, that Kurt Wimmer created Gun Carter in his back garden.
Oh, it's very much got a feel of created in the back garden.
If you look at Kurt Wimmer, if you look him up on the internet, he looks like exactly the kind of guy who would go in his garden and then create this crazy gun kung fu. And it's just like, I could not take him seriously after that. And I've watched a few interviews with him. And yeah, it's just like, he's a proper bro. And just imagining him in his garden, probably shirtless, just like waving like fake guns around, or just like doing gun fingers. I couldn't get that image out of my head once I heard that story.
I think it's what makes the film kind of just not as good as it could be, right? I do think it's a good film, and it's worth existing. You know, all the stuff we talked about kind of updating these themes and doing a new story of it, and it does a good job of a dystopia. But it's like shooting yourself in the foot, basically. Like the film's very derivative of other better dystopian films. But you can get away with that. You can do that. It's fine to do that and just be derivative and make an okay film. But then, throwing in something that silly, it destroys your case, doesn't it? That you're trying to make.
Yeah, but it is the centerpiece of the film, isn't it? It's what people watch it for, sort of like the action sequences and the gun carter and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of like that stylized thing was big in the sort of like the 2000s.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a drawing point for audiences.
When it came out, that was what I was interested in. And now I think it's
I
think it's the worst thing about the film now. But I think there's a lot to like about the film, and I just don't think Gun Carter's one of those things.
Yeah. So what about things to like then? I mean, one of the things which I quite enjoyed was this idea that it's the kind of same thing as Fahrenheit 451. They're destroying history in order to like rewrite it for this new society. So in the first scene, they're destroying the Mona Lisa. Like they proved that it's the real Mona Lisa, and then they're like, right, we're going to burn
That
it.
was great, because that really fits in with the idea of the guy who created Gun Carter in his back garden would also be the same guy who's like, what represents art very quickly? The Mona Lisa. They're going to burn.
I mean, it worked for me. I was like, oh yeah, art. That's definitely art.
Yeah.
That's a big piece. That's a very
that's
big
the
piece.
number one art. Yeah, I like that. It's fine. It's good. You're right. That's a better way of like. I mean, it's shorthand in film, isn't it? And that, I suppose, that's fine to do. So yeah, they're destroying all art because art evokes emotion, and as we said, emotion leads to hatred. Hatred leads to the dark side, right?
Hate leads to suffering.
Yeah, exactly. It's all that kind of stuff. And I mean, it's all art, isn't it? It's not just books in this. It's music. It's tat as well. They go into these rooms full of like bits from like you find them in charity shops now.
Yeah, it was like a charity shop that you wanted to.
Yeah, they've got like all this old school wallpaper, but it's all colourful and it's like a throwback in time. But yeah, it's quite interesting that is their representation of the part.
It's got they've got those clacking balls that office guys used to have on their desk in like the 80s and the 90s. I don't even know what they're called.
Clackers. Let's just call them clackers. They're not called clackers.
You're right. Just it looked like a charity shop that he was wandering around, but it's an interesting kind of visual representation of all the stuff that evokes emotion in people.
I mean, he plays Beethoven, doesn't he? That's gonna
again.
Yeah, we're gonna see
very similar to the Mona Lisa. It's like, okay, well, at least it wasn't like Beethoven. Like,
well, we're gonna see Beethoven again when we discuss Clockwork Orange, and I think that's done in a more interesting way, isn't it? But you haven't seen Clockwork Orange, so I'm going to stop with the spoilers.
But yeah, Beethoven, #1 music art guy. Does he pronounce it correctly? I think he pronounces it fairly correctly when he reads Ludwig van Beethoven. I think he says it right, doesn't he? Which you absolutely wouldn't if you spoke English and read the name Beethoven. You'd
Beethoven.
Yeah, what did Bill and Ted call him? Beef oven?
Oven. Sounds right for Bill and Ted.
This is Dave Beethoven.
Sie so schön, madame.
And then they go one step further with sort of like things which connect to emotion, and they've got dogs and animals, and like the scene with the dogs is like, it seems a little bit out of place, but it's very John Wick as well.
Oh,
isn't it?
yeah, reminiscent of John Wick. I didn't think it was out of place. I actually thought it was a really powerful scene. It's like, what's that? Isn't there a screenwriting book called Save the Cat or something like that? Like,
yes, Blake Snyder. It's a really good book,
based on the idea that like you shouldn't kill animals in a film. It's like the worst crime, basically, and rightly so. So yeah, it works. It just works in this film because it's got to be such an impactful, awful thing to do that Preston's got to stand there and sort of flinchingly watch it happen. That's going to have a massive effect on his emotional journey.
Yeah, and it's interesting that it goes like that one step further from having just art and memorabilia about emotions and stuff, and having actual connections to animals as being such a sort of like a center point for humanity. And like it's the opposite of dehumanization, isn't it? Because they're caring for these animals, they're looking after them, and then Preston sees a puppy
I love
and
it.
gets all gooey and says, no, we can't shoot him, we have to take him away. And it's like, yeah, it's like that kind of like heartwarming moment.
Yeah, it is heartwarming, isn't it? And I just thought it was a really good scene. And like, yeah, the moment where he kind of holds the dog up and is looking at it is a great little bit of Christian Bale acting. Just starts staring so straight faced into the cutest puppy you've ever seen, and it licks his face. I do wonder if like was that funny on set? Like, did they have a bit of a laugh at that? Because it's sort of a funny moment. Christian Bale strikes me as an incredibly humorless guy. I don't really know anything about him, but I always think of that outburst he had on the Terminator set. Remember, that's all I know about his personality. Oh, good for you. That's what I think of when I think of Christian Bale. So I just wonder if he found it like funny. Did he find the dog cute? He's very good at holding the dog up awkwardly. He's very convincing.
What I found interesting as well was the fact that they've all got Christian Bale slick back hair in his dystopian society, and that's just Christian Bale's look at the time, isn't it? Like American Psycho, the slick back hair. But that obviously feeds into sort of like these drones as well, because no one has like out there haircuts. They're all quite regimented, yet he's still taken the time to like slick it back and make himself look
cool. In that society, they would all actually look like Taye Diggs, because Taye Diggs has the most efficient haircut.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so they should actually be looking like him and not... Christian Bale's looks actually a bit of vanity more.
I mean, Sean Bean's trying to pull off that look as well, but I mean, it's not quite as slick as Christian Bale.
I don't know how Christian Bale has such slick hair all of the time.
It's great hairline as well. I mean, it's just, he's done it with that look.
He's a handsome fella.
I mean, they're all handsome fellas in this, aren't they? Because they're supposed to be like the pinnacle of society. That's why they're all sort of like, they're ripped, aren't they? So they're like these these Grammaton clerics have to be efficient and fit, don't they, in order to sort of like kind of like an Aryan race kind of thing with the Nazis. They're trying to make sure that everyone sort of like is this style of person. That kind of like reduces down people's individuality as well, because they're all supposed to be these like superhuman people that are in control and are the people which are sort of like considered the best in their society.
Yeah, totally. And we didn't talk about this when we were talking about Fahrenheit 451, but I saw quite a lot of Aryan-looking characters in that. Like, obviously, Montag is blonde hair, blue eyes. I think he's got blue eyes as well.
He's Austrian as well, which I thought was maybe sort of like a thing that they were doing there.
And his chief, I think most of the firemen that we see, certainly the ones that are like main characters, were blonde or greying, but looked like they were blonde. So there's a bit of an Aryan vibe coming off of them as well.
Yeah, it gets all sort of murky with that kind of stuff, doesn't it? And sort of like the Nazi references. But I feel like all that kind of stuff, it comes into a lot of dystopias, doesn't it? Because it's...
just a bit in Equilibrium, the flag of Libria.
Jesus, yeah.
It's literally a swastika, isn't it? It's just a...
Yeah,
if you
pretty
slightly
much. It's just like a swastika.
Slightly rearrange the legs, as it were, of the swastika in the Nazi flag, you would have the flag of the Tetragrammaton. How good is that word? Tetragrammaton.
Tetragrammaton. I can't even pronounce it properly.
It's grammaton or grammatron. I'm not sure. It just sounds great. It's like a again.
It's very futuristic, isn't it?
It is. But since you told me that Kurt Wimmer created Gun Carter in his back garden, I'm just sort of picturing this like teenager saying words like Tetragrammaton, Gun Carter. You know.
Love it. Absolutely love it.
So we have created a new arm of the law. The Grammaton Cleric, whose sole task it is to seek out and eradicate the true source of man's inhumanity to man. his ability to feel.
So we've got this sort of like Nazi society, is basically what we're saying, who are rebelling against them. And so the sense offenders, they're living in this underground. They refer to them as like being the underground, but I love the fact that they are underground.
Oh, God,
it's very on the nose.
Yeah, the more we talk about this film, I really don't think it is a good film, is it? There's some incredibly stupid stuff in it. The underground,
but it was like that moment,
and they couldn't find the underground. That was the bit. That was like they've been searching high and low for the underground. It's like, well, guess where? You're gonna kick yourself, guys.
The clue's in the name, guys. Come on.
So the underground. What's their master plan? They're going to try and destroy all the prosium. I think, is that the idea?
Yeah, destroy all the factories, and then it will disrupt everything, so they can all go crazy and take
Pretty
over.
solid plan in terms of the idea. I'm a little bit confused about how they thought it would play out in practice, because they enlist Preston to assassinate Father, the leader of this world. And then somehow that will destroy all the prosium. I got a bit lost in what the details of their plan was. It seems to go according to plan.
All you need to know, Matt, is that they're stationed in the right places and they're going to blow up the factories at the right time, and everything will be good and they can storm the palace.
Yeah, because that does happen. That's how it plays out in the end of the film. I was just a bit confused. Like, he shoots some monitors and then everything starts exploding, and I was like, okay, good for you, man.
Yeah, Christian Bale just goes crazy on everyone. Just shoots up the place. I mean, he's got a famous kill count in this as well. I think he shoots and kills 118 people, which is exactly half the movie's total body count, which is 236.
Jesus Christ.
So yeah, it's quite heavy duty.
I didn't feel like 236 people were dying on screen.
Everyone's getting shot up with gun Carter in this film.
It's a very efficient way of dispatching targets, as we know.
No one is safe.
So how did you feel that was like a satisfying ending then? We do get an overthrowal of the dystopia. We talked about this in the intro episode, didn't we? That like we would be seeing some dystopias getting overthrown. Montag doesn't get to do that in Fahrenheit 451. He escapes from it.
Yeah, I think it has to be either one or the other, doesn't it? You either escape the dystopia or you bring down the heads and the government of the dystopia, and then you sort of like build a new society like from the ashes of the old one. So I think like this sort of went down the route that it had to go down. Like again, it's kind of like Matrix-y, because Preston becomes the guy who is going to take down the government and be the big revolutionary, even though he's just one guy who stops taking his medicine, his drugs for a bit, and then just goes off on one.
He becomes the savior figure through breaking free of the rules and becoming independent. But interestingly, he's kind of always the one, isn't he? Because he's introduced as being like the very best cleric. He's so good at sensing emotions. He's actually really in touch with emotions. He just takes the prosium and suppresses them.
And I think this is it as well. Like when you've got people who are part of the baddies initially and then they turn, it's always the guys who are the most efficient or are really up there in the sort of like the government. They're sort of like, they're valued as being a baddie. And then when they turn, it's really bad for the government.
Yeah, because Montag's on the way up, isn't he? He's up for the promotion. He's got the potential to become a really successful fireman. And similarly,
Just saying that sentence. He's got the potential to be a really successful fireman.
And similarly, Preston is the absolute best of the best in the clerics.
Yeah, he's a very good grammaton cleric.
Tetragrammaton cleric! Gun Carter!
Preston, the supposed savior of the resistance, and now its destroyer. And along with them, you've given me yourself. Come. Good. Entirely without incident.
No. Oh. Shit. Not without incident.
So there's a couple of other characters we haven't really talked about. So there's DuPont and Brandt. So what did you think about them and sort of how they are taking pleasure in their jobs?
Like Brandt in particular, he's grinning his way through like half of the film, isn't he? When he's setting up Preston and going to get him arrested and killed, he's smiling all the way through that. I was actually quite surprised that Preston never calls him out on it. And similarly with DuPont, there's a scene where DuPont's like slamming his fist on the table and like screaming at Preston for not doing a good enough job. And I was like, why is Preston not saying something? Like, he shouldn't get angry. No one should get angry. He should be taking his Prosium.
Yeah, I mean, they're feeling emotions, aren't they? And that's the thing they don't really clarify, because Brandt all of his motives are kind of based on his emotions, aren't they? Because he wants to get one up on Preston. And he's not doing this out of a sort of a logical thing. It seems like a vendetta. And it's almost like jealousy as well. He wants to be the number one. So it's almost like he's feeling anyway.
Yeah, jealousy is an emotion. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess what the whole the overall idea is that like it's the kind of the hypocrisy of the society that's in control, and that hypocrisy goes right to the top, you know. And literally right to the top, because DuPont is revealed to actually be Father Sean Pertwee's just like a video illusion. So he is the most powerful man in this world, and he's obviously feeling emotion. So I think the idea is that, like, you see a lot of hypocrisy in a dystopian society. You see it in Fahrenheit 451 as well. Like I said, with the holding up Mein Kampf, like, hey, we're not Nazis, we're burning the Nazis along with everything else. But like, they obviously are quite fascistic. And similarly here, they even do the same thing in Equilibrium, don't they? Because there's footage of Hitler when they're broadcasting the kind of propaganda messages of war has led to so much destruction, and a shot of Hitler comes up on screen as an example of that. So they're sort of saying like, well, we're better than all of that because we've moved past it, but they are hypocrites. They're doing very similar things.
Yeah, and it's the way they're trying to treat war, and the way they're going about trying to get peace. It's I was watching some video about this, and they were talking about how they're not treating the disease, they're just treating the symptoms. Mm. So they're trying to restrain emotions, and they're trying to stop books in Fahrenheit 451 and people thinking. And that's just the symptoms. It's not the actual root cause. The root cause is sort of people trying to like take advantage of other people, and that causes conflict. And there's so many other things that cause conflict than just emotions. So you're just treating a symptom, not the actual disease.
Yeah, that's a good point. And in Equilibrium, they all sort of willingly sacrifice. They're aware of the sacrifice they're making as well, which I thought was quite interesting. In tackling those negative symptoms, they're all also aware of the fact that they've literally sacrificed their happiness, and they're all just like fine with that. We're like, we willingly give that up in order to tackle, just symptoms, as it turns out.
Yeah. And yet you've still got people in the society who are pretending to be under the influence of this drug and still getting by. I mean, Preston's kids haven't been on the drug, have they? And yet they are able to blend into the society and still get around okay. So that was a thing which I was quite interested by as well. Like, how are they that good at pretending like they haven't got any emotions? I mean, the girl is not good at all. She's like very much acting like a little girl throughout the whole thing.
But his son's a little grass. He's like checking in on his dad, taking his drug and all that stuff, and he's very weird because of that. He's a weird character. It only makes him weirder when you find out he's not on the Prosium and he's willingly just doing all that stuff just to keep up appearances. I wondered what you thought of him, because I know you don't like creepy kids in films, and I actually found him quite creepy.
Yeah, he is really creepy, but I think because I've seen this film before going in, I was kind of like, I was trying to look at him like, okay, so he's just doing this to test the water all the time. So he's always just testing his dad just to see how he is, because he calls him dad at one point, whereas before he's just calling him by name. Like, he says night dad.
Oh, I missed that.
Yeah, that's when he's kind of like, he knows that Preston is off the drug. and he's kind of like able to let his guard down a bit.
Again, it brings me back to thinking about like how husbands and wives work in this society. If you can't even have a dog because it's too risky to like care for a dog because that'll cause you to have emotions, why do they have kids? Like, I understand why you have kids in this society to keep the society going, literally, like ensure there's a next generation. But I mean, why not just do it? Just send them off to like a boarding school or whatever, or look after someone else's kids, you know, and just do it. Surely there's an inherent risk in having your own children that you will feel emotions, I guess is what I'm saying, and that there would be a better way of doing that in this society.
Yeah, but I think obviously they're so sure of the drug, aren't they, that they kind of like, they think, oh, this will never happen.
Yeah,
but
sure.
Of course they're going to catch feelings, and yeah, it's all going to go to pot.
Yeah. Well, it all goes to pot in spectacular fashion, doesn't it? And Taye Diggs gets the front of his face sliced off.
Oh, yes. Very Resident Evil.
Very Resident
kind of
Evil,
like,
yeah. Which one came
Yeah.
first, actually? This would roughly the same time, isn't it?
I'm not sure. They've similar sort of like stylings again, aren't they?
Yeah. Oh, who's that? That's Paul W.S. Anderson.
Yes, that guy. That bloody guy. The computer games guy.
Yeah. So it all goes to pot in spectacular fashion, and the half the city gets blown up, and then we do get a final shot of the resistance like gunning down people in the streets.
Lovely.
Very happy ending.
Freedom. With these two films then, Matt, who do you think this sort of like finding out that you're in the wrong and then coming to this revelation, is this something which we're going to see again in dystopia films? Like, and how has it really sort of like informed us on dystopias, do you think?
I think like my biggest takeaway from this is the hypocrisy in the societies, which I don't think we really touched on that when we did our intro episode about what we're expecting to see, but now I feel like it's going to come up quite a lot in these dystopian films, right? What about you? What was your kind of takeaways from these?
Yeah, I think it's that, and I think this is the first pairing of films where we've seen sort of the law enforcement involved, but we've seen dehumanization, but we've also seen people sort of becoming human again, and how that affects their characters, and sort of like what journey that goes on and what it leads to in the society, and then the eventual upheaval that results in. So I think this is kind of like a narrative thread that's gonna keep coming up.
Yeah, the sense of awakening. I think that's what we're going to see a lot of, which is interesting because obviously we talked about that at length in Series 4 when we were doing virtual reality, the idea that you can wake up from a simulation, and we're going to be seeing that in these dystopian films.
It's definitely a theme which I think is important for science fiction. I'm sure it's a theme that's going to come up next week. And what are we looking at next week, Matt?
We're looking at two big books. We've done one big book today, but we've got two big books next week in our big books episode, where we'll be looking at 1984 from 1984 and Brave New World from 1980. There's a few versions of that, but we're looking at the 1981 for that.
Yeah, we might chat about some of the other versions during that episode, but yeah, we're going to focus on that 1981 so we can keep it very 80s next week in all aspects.
Yeah, so do join us for that, listeners. We're looking forward to doing that episode, and we hope you are too.
And if you want to get in touch with us, you can find us on all forms of social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We've got the lot. So if you look up @Through Sci-Fi or @Through Sci-Fi Pod, you'll be able to find us there. So come and have a chat.
And as we mentioned earlier, if you want to support the show, you can come and find us on patreon.com/journeythroughsci-fi and join for extra episodes there. If you don't want to do that, but you still want to support the show, you can always leave us a nice review. That really helps boost the numbers of the show. So leave us a review with 5 stars and let us know what object you would sniff to regain your emotions in a dystopian society.
Oh my God. Brilliant. Well, that's it from us today. We'll see you next time.